He took a book from the shelf. A play written decades ago about a woman who lost her youth and a man who had lost everything, plunging rapidly into a love bordering on madness. On the open page was a dialogue between a man and a woman. In Zion's office, a storm raged outside. It was easing, but the wind still drove the rain, and trees along the road bent under gusts. Noon felt dark and gloomy. There were 3 knocks at the door at precise intervals. Zion slowly turned and invited them in. The door opened silently, and a tall, slender youth with fiery red hair and freckles on his cheeks entered. Everyone called him Red Tory. Torai took off his glasses and blew on the lenses, a habitual gesture when nervous or anxious. He told Zion they had received replies from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 5th zones, each agreeing. Asked about the 4th zone, Tory said there was no response yet. The leaders of the other 4 zones suggested holding the summit without the 4th. Zion asked to schedule the summit, inform the 4th zone of the situation, and send them a polite message requesting reconsideration, repeating the attempts as many times as needed. Torai noted this essentially meant begging them, to which Zion agreed, stressing the importance of the summit for all 6 zones. Zion asked Torai why the 4th zone was delaying their response. Torai guessed the 4th feared the 6th zone, as the union initiator, might exploit the alliance for its own gain. When Zion asked what to do, Torai suggested first holding a conference with the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 5th zones to build consensus and present a united front, making the 4th think twice before going their own way. Zion agreed this approach was logical. 2 years had passed since Zion took charge of the restructuring committee. Rebuilding the ruined city-state of the 6th zone was progressing smoothly. Government functions were temporarily limited, with the committee taking over to restore legislative, judicial, and executive branches, after which they planned to seek citizens' opinions. The committee's tasks included abolishing the Security Bureau, reorganizing the police, stabilizing living standards, maintaining city services and the economy, integrating the 4 blocks, especially the former Western one, and gradually dismantling Kronos, a special district within the old zone. At the same time, the committee worked on restoring relations with the other 5 zones to ensure true peace and harmony for the 6th zone both inside and beyond its borders. Zion believed internal policy and external diplomacy must work smoothly and effectively for successful recovery. Once, the planet was covered in greenery and abundant with water, suitable for human life. Despite deserts and permafrost, people lived in harmony with nature. But wars fueled by military power and the use of miniature atomic bombs shattered the planet's fragile balance. This created dead zones, areas where all life vanished and radiation spread at incredible speed. Climate changes accelerated, causing devastating rains, floods, typhoons, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and droughts. Habitable lands nearly disappeared. An old man who survived all this compared the planet to a body attacking and destroying infected cells. Survivors began searching for places to live, and only 6 areas remained where people built city-states. Named from the 1st to the 6th, of these 6 cities, the 6th zone showed the most impressive growth. A place of stability and prosperity, free from hunger and disease, disorder, poverty, discrimination, prejudice, inequality, and war. It was a sacred city built by humanity's collective mind. The 6th zone existed for its citizens, providing a thriving and comfortable life. No one threatening their safety, welfare, or life was tolerated. Inside the zone, all citizens were valued equally and treated with care, as proclaimed by many articles of the Citizen Charter. However, in reality, the old 6th zone created a rigid class hierarchy, repeatedly exploiting and destroying those outside its walls, oppressing people under the guise of maintaining order. Human dignity was reserved only for those at the top. People were assigned ranks and forced to live by them. Sion smirked at the absurdity. He saw the Utopia as nonsense. It was actually a dystopia soaked in despair. A society where 1% controlled the other 99% was corrupt from the start and worsened until it collapsed. Thus fell the 6th zone. Sion closed his eyes and saw the crimson flames engulfing the crumbling zone. Torai blinked and asked if he misspoke. Sion replied that Tori was wrong because he lacked confidence in his words. Torai admitted his doubts and reminded that interaction between zones remained minimal despite trade agreements, student exchanges, and economic cooperation. None of the 6 zones prioritized mutual relations. Sion confirmed there was no time for that. Each zone was busy maintaining order. However, all agreed to sign a treaty, swearing that wars would never happen again. Torai added that all 6 zones pledged to resolve disputes peacefully without military force by signing the Babylon Treaty. Sion explained the treaty banned armies and weapons to prevent humanity's extinction. The name Babylon comes from the ancient citadel in the 4th zone where the treaty was signed. Sion leaned back and noted all mayors accepted the treaty except the 6th zone's mayor, who only pretended and likely never intended to comply, keeping a powerful army under the Security Bureau's control. Torai argued those days were over, but Sion reminded him it had only been 2 years. 2 years ago, Sion saw with his own eyes the Western Bloc, the exile zone for 6th zone residents known as the Outskirts, where people lived in poverty under the watchful walls of the Holy City. They suffered hunger, cold, and disease, living in shacks. Children and elders fainted from exhaustion. The 6th zone's army stormed the Western Bloc market. The arriving vehicles looked like old armored cars but had the latest weapons, including a sonic cannon that instantly destroyed 2-story shacks. It was likely a weapons test in combat. Most at the market were women, children, elderly, and pregnant, unable to resist. Tanks crushed their homes, and soldiers shot without warning. It was a one-sided massacre witnessed by Sion. The voice told him to face the truth and remember it. Sion remembered everything without hiding or self-deception. Torai noticed that everything was different now, that the 6th zone had revived and changed. Sion interrupted, reminding him that those who refused to obey were branded enemies and eliminated by the 6th zone. Torai agreed with Sion and said his parents, freelance journalists, were eliminated after being accused of spreading fears about corruption in the mayoral election. On Tori's 15th birthday, Security Bureau agents took them away. His father returned 3 months later but was a different man, silent and withdrawn. The family survived thanks to his grandmother. Sion apologized for making Tori recall this, but Tori asked to continue, saying he had long wanted to tell the story and wasn't a distraction. One wall of Sion's office was missing, opening a view to the hall with municipal workers, where most came and went without asking. Sion moved his office from the top floor of the Moondrop to the 2nd floor, freeing the top floor for an observation deck and a public meeting hall. The body was removed, but dark bloodstains on the wall and carpet remained untouched by Sion's order, who believed it was necessary to preserve the memory. He couldn't pretend the reality didn't exist where young revolutionaries became cruel dictators, committing atrocities and massacres. Sion had to remember why the Utopia turned dystopian and prevent those mistakes from repeating. Sometimes he went upstairs and stood before the bloodstains, trying to absorb the truth and reflect. The voice urged him again not to look away and to imprint this in memory, reflecting over and over. Sion understood this was his task. He stayed there without calling Tori, who was disappearing into the glowing blue sky, because he knew what he had to do. Until he reached his goal, Tori would not accept him, would reject his hand, and keep refusing. Sion felt this deeply and asked Tori to tell everything, even if it caused pain. He wanted to hear every detail of what happened in the city, not just official records but personal stories, to gather the true history of the Holy City. Those who couldn't face the past honestly had no right to build the future. Torai steadied his breath and said that on the day he returned from school, neither his father nor sister were home. His grandmother, panicked, said they disappeared while she was out shopping and begged him to find them, but no one knew where they could be. Fear of the authorities made neighbors refuse to help, and Tori searched everywhere but found nothing. Both were discovered the next morning. Sion noticed Tori deliberately used the word discovered, separating people from objects. Torai explained they were found in a thicket near the Old North Gates, in a leafy forest by the airport, huddled together at the base of a beech tree. There were no wounds or visible suffering. The father poisoned himself and his sister. Sion tried to say murder, and Tori confirmed it was murder. The father forced his daughter to drink poison, then drank it himself. Sion cautiously asked if Tori thought the security bureau might have eliminated them by force, but he understood that if the bureau wanted to remove the father, they would have simply arrested and executed him. Staging a suicide was unnecessary. Still, it was murder committed by the Sixth Zone, either directly or by driving them to death. Tori reported that his father left a suicide note found while sorting through his belongings. In it, his father wrote about despair, the impossibility of living in the Sixth Zone, and not wanting to leave his daughter hopeless. He apologized for taking his sister and thanked Tori and their grandmother. Tori sadly looked out the large window where rain fell in steady streams. Sion recalled the doctor who, after escaping the correctional facility in the Western Bloc, cared for them and spoke of his younger brother, a student who refused to take part in the city's loyalty oath ritual. His brother was arrested on suspicion of conspiracy and returned 2 weeks later dead and cold, still breathing but lifeless, soon taking his own life. Tori's and the doctor's stories were similar, but Sion didn't equate them or reduce all Sixth Zone victims to mere statistics. He vowed to remember each person, their cries, fears, courage, and the miracle of life, to preserve the true story and pass it on. Otherwise, the rebirth of the Sixth Zone would vanish like a ghost. Sion closed his eyes and saw crimson flames burning the Sixth Zone to ashes, and a silhouette with flowing hair and deep gray eyes against the fire. Then he opened his eyes. Tori sighed softly, saying his father had rushed into despair, and it was monstrously foolish to take his little daughter. If his father were alive now, he could overcome hopelessness, and his sister would have a future. Now it seemed a cruel mockery, and Tori deeply regretted it. Tori met Sion's gaze and said he only found his mother's name and photo in the Security Bureau database last month. After her arrest, she was executed as a traitor, likely for refusing to write praise about the city. He told this to his grandmother, who didn't know what happened to his mother. Sion asked about her health, and Tori said she was fine. Hearing of his mother's fate, the grandmother said, "She was who she was, without shedding a tear. Now she helps orphans from the former Western Bloc and leads the volunteer group, Tomorrow's Sky." The group recently received a city grant and plans to partner with authorities. Tori admitted her strength was his support, and they both felt relief after. He visited his father's and sister's graves and told them about his mother and the city's reform. Most records only said liquidated, and the names of those who vanished without a trace and were secretly buried formed endless lists. Many had no remains or personal belongings left. Sion felt a cold wave down his spine as he prepared the data for release. The Sixth Zone kept existing, devouring every person. He wondered if those whose loved ones were consumed by the zone, like Tori, felt relief, and what the people of the former Western Bloc felt, who were used and killed without recognition of their dignity. They still remembered joy and hope, but joy was fleeting, and Sion didn't know what would replace it once it faded. Resentment, hatred, bitterness, suspicion, discontent, and disappointment. The walls of the Sixth Zone were torn down, but breaking down the barriers in people's hearts proved far harder. Deep inside, former city citizens harbored hatred and fear of the Western Bloc residents, fearing revenge. The Western Bloc people, in turn, felt doubt, disgust, and fear toward the former citizens. Given the past, these feelings were inevitable. Sion admitted that leaving despair behind is incredibly difficult, especially after people lost their loved ones so cruelly. He doubted whether everyone from the former Western Bloc would believe in the hope of the new Sixth Zone and how it was possible, since the knot was so tight that he couldn't unravel it even an inch. Tori reminded that Sion lived in the old Western Bloc and endured terrible hardships, though he was lucky not to starve or freeze behind walls. He expressed regret for the fate of the former Western Bloc's people, whose rights were ignored and who suffered from lack of aid for the sick and wounded. When Sion asked where Tori got this information, he explained he was digitizing the Sixth Zone's history for future generations, including the city and Western Bloc's history, and learned how terrible conditions were, though he doubted the completeness of his knowledge. Sion acknowledged the Western Bloc could indeed be compared to hell. Medicine was scarce, hunger prevailed, death was everywhere, and worst of all, the hunt for people and inhuman sin of the sixth zone still undocumented. However, he stressed it wasn't all hell. Human life took root, people clung to existence, worked, found small joys, loved, and sought any available wisdom and means to survive. There was a market, a theater, and a half-ruined hotel. Sion approached the window and touched the glass, recalling the Western Bloc with longing. He mentally returned to the books on the shelf. A small stove with a pot, a couch, a blanket, the squeak of mice, the looks and voices that warmed despite the chill, and the deep silence that was comforting. He knew those days were tinged with bittersweet feelings and lived them without doubt. Clenching his fist, Sion noted that much truth about the old Western Bloc remained unrevealed. The restructuring committee includes their representatives, and everything depends on the committee's next steps and their meeting with them. Torai agreed the path would be hard but expressed faith that people would learn to live together, since the walls were gone, and one cannot remain forever trapped by the concepts of inside and outside. Sion emphasized the importance of external diplomacy to ensure stability within the Sixth Zone, the need to explain and apologize for violating the Sixth Zone's Babylon Treaty, and to confirm a peaceful anti-war pact. However, the main task remained humanity's survival, and holding a summit without all 6 cities was pointless, since one isolated city could cause a great split that must be avoided. He said that so far no city had built close ties, preferring to produce and consume almost everything independently, though open trade routes existed. The Sixth Zone, lacking sea access, imported seafood and some industrial goods, exporting pure elements, silicon, germanium, selenium, and other semiconductors, maintaining dominance as the sole semiconductor exporter. Still, new circumstances demanded revising this policy. Surface pollution spread, catastrophic weather anomalies increased, radioactive contamination zones flared everywhere, and desertification accelerated beyond forecasts. Partial ecological recovery lagged behind pollution speed, and if this continued, human viable territories would shrink further, leading to species extinction. Action was needed. Sion expressed hope to share a sense of urgency with leaders of other cities. As cities 1, 2, 3, and 5 warmly welcomed the summit invitation, he suddenly asked Tori if the mayor of Zone 4 was a man. Torai confirmed that the mayors of Zones 1 and 4 are men, both in office about 2 years, while the mayors of Zones 2, 3, and 5 are women, re-elected by a large margin despite term limits. He offered to prepare details on voting stats, policies, polls, speeches, and intercity ties, but Sion declined, saying he remembered it all. Torai called them sharp leaders with experience, and Sion joked it would be a summit of insightful moms and dads requiring steel will, as they'd likely be looked down upon. Torai warned that the Zone 4 mayor is especially difficult, having once said women and children have no place in politics, which caused a scandal during assembly debates. Sion admitted he was genuinely shocked such archaic views still exist today. Torai said he was so surprised he almost fell off his chair, and that the mayor often makes offensive remarks due to strange prejudices. He suggested the mayor resists the summit because it's Sion's initiative and fears his projects will be sidelined, so he delays responding. Sion agreed this was possible but guessed the real reason might be more practical than personal views, and asked Tori what he meant. Sion pressed a switch on the table, revealing a hologram full of numbers. Torai recognized the names and barely believed what he saw. Sion explained it was a list of high-ranking officials who fled Old Zone 6, and the amount of gold they took, with over 80% sent to Zone 4. Torai noted the numbers seemed outrageous since gold bars take up space, and the total matched Zone 6's annual budget. Sion confirmed these were likely secret reserves kept in a safe under the Moondrop, which was emptied. Torai asked how they identified the culprits and the stolen amount so precisely. Sion said the officials were in such a hurry they forgot to disable security cameras, which recorded them in high resolution. He said they would demand restitution using the footage as proof, stressing the gold belongs to Zone 6, which must be recovered at all costs. For this, Zone 4's help is vital, and he plans to discuss it with them privately. Torai quietly suggested the Zone 4 mayor's delayed response is a tactic to buy time for counterarguments. Sion agreed and added the mayor doesn't want political talks with a young leader, so he stalls. He described the mayor as a sly old fox, an experienced and cunning politician who's held power for 20 years, despite open media and fair elections in Zone 4. Torai reminded him they must figure out how to negotiate with the mayor and recover not only the gold but also the escaped officials to prosecute them. Sion countered that the priority is to recover the gold, and the officials can't hide since there's no safe refuge outside the 6 zones. And after alliances with other cities and official extradition requests, escape will be impossible. He added the officials live less luxuriously than Tori thinks and are under limited freedom in Zone 4, which monitors them, waiting for the right moment to use them in negotiations or attempt to seize the gold. Torai concluded that the mayor of the 4th zone was truly cunning, which Sion agreed with, admitting he doubted his ability to oppose him. Torai expressed confidence in Sion's abilities and promised to persistently push for the 4th zone's involvement. Sion thanked him and noted that the 4th zone's mayor was aware of growing threats and would not delay action. Turning to the door, Tori paused and quietly asked Sion if he planned to run for mayor next year, which was the real reason for his visit. Sion confirmed rumors were already circulating and explained that the restructuring committee currently governed the 6th zone, assigning duties to specialized departments. He noted a severe shortage of skilled personnel but hoped in young specialists, many from the former Western Bloc, where, contrary to expectations, talented engineers, artists, and entrepreneurs had emerged. Sion emphasized that development opportunities had only just opened and that the 6th zone's doors were wide open. He believed they were on time and that governance must keep pace with the recovery process. The restructuring committee was to be disbanded, with democratic elections for mayor and government assembly held in about a year. Preparations were accelerating to ensure flawless elections, as they would determine the 6th zone's future. Sion stressed the need for impartial elections and a fair government, to avoid past mistakes and prevent power or wealth concentration in few hands. He admitted he didn't believe in the city's sanctity or utopia, only in learning from mistakes and living genuinely. Sion promised to do his utmost to prepare the elections, seeing it as his duty. Torai reminded him many saw Sion as the ideal mayor candidate, but Sion stopped him, saying, elections weren't important now and focus should be on negotiations with the 4th zone. At that moment there was a knock and Sion invited entry. The door opened, and a woman with dark skin and mid-length black hair entered, her hairstyle complementing her round eyes and button nose. Her skin and hair color matched Inukasi's, but her hair was neither long nor wild. She apologized to the chairman and asked if she was interrupting, noting Tori was busy. Torai quickly bowed and left, his cheeks reddening more than before. Sion said they were done and asked if she had an urgent report. The woman, named Ruka, reported an incident that appeared to be 3 consecutive murders. She was from the old Western Bloc. Her father managed the market and dispute resolution, and her mother wrote children's books. Both parents died during a raid, her father under rubble, her mother shot by soldiers. Ruka studied at a free support school set up by the Reconstruction Committee and recently passed the civil service exam. She now works in the Security Bureau, which was fully reorganized. No autocratic control, no baseless arrests, and no military-grade weapons. Staff at crime scenes carry only minimal protective gear. Sion reminded her that 3 days ago, a man was killed outside the lost city. Ruka confirmed and added that earlier, a young man's body was found under strange circumstances in the old Western Bloc. Sion wondered why a body that had been there for a month was only found now and asked if it was buried deep. Ruka said it was shallowly buried in a corner of the old Western Bloc, where locals were used to dead bodies and decay smells. Sion realized death was everywhere in the Western Bloc, accompanied by the stench of blood, decay, and agonizing screams. Ruka explained that her father helped collectors gather bodies at the market, and locals were so used to it they didn't notice the body at first. She added that catching the criminals is the Security Bureau's job, and Sion shouldn't get involved. Sion agreed he wasn't up to the task. Ruka laughed, noting he really wasn't cut out for this work, and her smile reminded Sion of Safu's. Then Ruka grew serious and warned Sion to be careful since he lives in the lost city near the former Western Bloc. She asked if he had any proof he might be a target. He said no, but she insisted there's no evidence yet, though she fears for his safety because he rides a bike. Ruka offered to arrange transport for him, coordinating with her boss. Sion asked if the Security Bureau believes the 3 deaths are linked as a series of murders. She added that despite decomposition, the cuts were so clean the coroner admired the killer's skill, likely using a military knife or similar tool. According to the coroner, the victim probably died instantly and didn't realize what happened. Hearing this, Sion's heart raced. Thoughts of the killer's skill and the military knife swirled in his mind, but he tried to convince himself it was impossible. Ruka gently called his name, breaking his thoughts. Sion said he trusts the Security Bureau is already taking all necessary measures without his input, but asked to issue a safety bulletin for the affected areas. Ruka confirmed patrols have increased there, and since many former Western Bloc residents don't follow news, they plan to post physical notices. She stressed Sion's home is in a risk zone and advised against biking. Sion said he can handle it by hiring a bodyguard. Ruka suggested taking someone qualified from the Security Bureau, but Sion gently shook his head and said, he knows the right person and will hire a private bodyguard, preferring not to use a Bureau agent. He explained the services are chronically understaffed, and riding with an unfamiliar Bureau agent made him uneasy. He preferred someone he'd enjoy being around. Ruka was surprised and asked who he knew. Sion said he knows someone who can lend him a top-notch bodyguard. Ruka appreciated his words and agreed to classify personnel expenses as government costs. Sion joked that payment would likely be meat on the bone, dried fruits, and cheese daily, maybe with 2 or 3 dried fish. Ruka was surprised, but Sion held back laughter and assured her he'd arrange a personal security deal. Ruka said she'd report to her boss and left the room. By then, the rain had stopped and the wind quieted. Sion considered visiting Inukashi tomorrow, deciding while listening to the wind. Inukashi, not her real name, was Sion's dear friend living in the old Western Bloc, side by side with dogs, earning a living by renting them out. When the 6th zone walls still separated her from the Western Bloc, the dogs helped endure the harsh winter cold. Now, a business district and social services were being built in the Western Bloc, and the flow of people renting dogs from Inukashi had nearly dried up. Instead, many began taking dogs as pets or guards, and some offered to buy them. At their last meeting, Inukashi said she'd sell dogs only for a good reason. Sion brought her homemade pretzels and panini from Karen. Inukashi ate happily, smacking her lips, and poured Sion strong black tea, a taste of the Western Bloc for him. In Nozumi's room stood a chipped white mug, a stove, an old chair under piles of books, and a large library, all untouched. Sion sometimes came to clean, air the room, and sit there, sometimes dozing off. At such moments, he recalled the day he asked Nozumi to read Macbeth, Act 5, Scene 5. Nozumi read Macbeth's monologue, and that scene stayed vivid in Sion's memory despite the time passed. Sion took the steel mug Inukashi offered and asked what she meant by a good reason. She replied it truly was a good reason. Sion asked if there were any really good prerequisites. Inukashi asked what that meant, and Sion explained he wanted to know her basis for giving a dog to someone. She said she gives a dog only if she knows it will be valued more than herself and charges a meeting fee. Petting a long-haired brown dog, she explained she reads people's behavior, how they look at the dog, care for it, and the words they choose. She immediately senses if a person truly loves the dog and will care well. Dogs get nervous around those they dislike and relax with good people. She asks the dog if it wants to become that person's child, and if the dog agrees, then so it shall be. Sion found this logical. Inukashi added she drives away those who focus only on a cute face, white one, curly tail, purebred, or floppy ears, because they can't be trusted, and dogs don't get along with them. She may lend a dog temporarily but never leaves a scared dog with them. Sion understood and admired how she distinguishes the bad from the good. Inukashi said she always lived with dogs, who are smarter and more perceptive than people and always sense the truth. The wind stirred her hair. From their first meeting, Inukashi lived in a ruined hotel, and even as the crumbling buildings around were restored, she stayed there. Suddenly, Sion muttered that it was a good place. Inukashi snorted, calling it a first-class hotel, warning that if anyone tried to kick her out, she'd bite their throat and tear them apart, reminding Sion of the threat. The brown dog, sensing its owner's tension, gave Sion a look hinting at a bite. Sion finished the thin black tea and said it was hard to imagine her living anywhere else. Inukashi said she didn't need another place and suddenly mentioned that Sion hadn't touched Nozumi's room, then abruptly fell silent and looked away. Sion noticed it was the first time since Nozumi left. Inukashi pressed her lips as if biting back a slip. Sion set down his mug and tried to answer casually, confirming he left the room as it was, adding that no scoundrel should rummage through others' things without the owner's permission. He stood up, said it was time to go, and thanked her for the tea. Inukashi also stood, her dark eyes on Sion, and asked if he thought Nozumi would return. She wore a loose black shirt and pants with stretched knees, better clothes than before, but the habit of wearing worn-out ones remained. Sion remarked that Inukashi had grown. She was surprised and asked what he meant. Sion noted her body had gained a soft roundness, while her hands stayed thin but gentle. Inukashi barked at him not to change the subject. A brown dog struggled to stand, and other dogs gathered nearby, impeccably trained. One word from Inukashi, and they were ready to attack a person, protect her, fetch things, or deliver letters. Inukashi asked Sion what he felt and if he truly waited for Nozumi, believing he would come back. Sion answered yes. Inukashi laughed warmly, noting many years had passed but Sion still had sawdust in his head. Sion asked if she didn't believe either. The smile left Inukashi's face. She frowned and asked why Sion was so attached to her and why it mattered if Nozumi returned. She added that if Nozumi brought a bag of gold and a cart of meat as gifts, she'd wait with open arms and even treat him to lunch, but that wouldn't happen. Sion said who knows, maybe the gold was a stretch, but the meat. Inukashi cut him off, saying it still wouldn't happen, shook her long hair, and declared Nozumi wasn't the type to bring gifts. If there was a chance, she and the dogs would have run away without looking back. She explained she never accepted anything from him without trouble following and warned Sion that Nozumi was a trickster and distrustful. A complete chaos with a slippery tongue that spins lies. And dealing with him was like sticking your hand into a viper's nest for eggs. Pure suicide. Sion held back a laugh and said Inukashi was harsh. Inukashi snorted and said she knew how much she'd suffered because of Nozumi, more than Sion had ever heard. Sion asked if she wanted to see him. Inukashi snapped, asking who wanted to see whom. Sion clarified if she wanted to see Nozumi. Inukashi shuddered like a wet dog shaking off water and declared he was a scoundrel, liar, fraud, and third-rate actor, and that Sion was crazy if he thought otherwise, advising him to get his head checked or Karen would be upset if something happened to him. Sion admitted he'd been exhausted and insanely busy lately. Inukashi snapped back, telling him to quit before he lost his mind completely, and offered him a job washing dogs with her, like old times. Sion admitted the offer was tempting, the most alluring he'd had in a long time. Inukashi said the plumbing was now installed, water was plentiful, no need to haul it from the river, and everyone was happy. There was electricity, though the dogs weren't used to it, so she used a lamp. Even a hospital was there now. She knew how hard Sion worked. Sion corrected her, saying he wasn't alone. The whole staff worked to the bone, and it was their achievement. But there was still much work, and he was drowning in problems. Sometimes you just want to bury yourself in the sand, not knowing what to hold on to. Inukashi smirked and said it didn't matter who else could do something. Everyone has limits, and she could see Sion was already at his edge. Sion quietly said she was worried about him and thanked her. Inukashi twisted her face into a grimace and waved her arms wildly. saying she was just telling him not to work himself to death, that pushing to madness was stupid, and that Sion was acting like a real fool and an idiot with a baby's brain. She added that nothing was cooking in his empty head, and he wasn't even fit to feed her dogs. Sion noted that was even harsher than what she said about Nezumi. Inukashi grumbled that Nezumi was a crook, a rogue, and a third-rate actor, but at least he knew his worth. He was a thorn you wanted to bash, but at least good enough for dog food. He knew his limits and avoided fights he was doomed to lose. In that, he was smarter than Sion's miserable state. Sion deeply agreed with that. He saw how Nezumi created chances for success, even the faintest, clinging to every opportunity and overcoming any obstacle, climbing walls that seemed unbeatable. He made chances, possibility, and hope from nothing and used them to the fullest. Sion had seen this many times. Inukashi muttered that Nezumi said, "I only destroyed, and Sion will rebuild." Sion flinched and asked what she said. Inukashi explained those were Nezumi's last words, though not exactly final or just farewells, maybe a confession, but more likely incoherent ramblings, which he told her. She didn't remember exactly when, maybe before leaving the 6th zone or even earlier. She recalled him saying something like, "Creating is 100 times harder than destroying," and laughed at his bravado. Sion pondered destruction. Inukashi confirmed that was his thing, and he put on a whole show when he smashed everything. After Nezumi destroyed the 6th zone itself, he disappeared. Sion clenched his fists and admitted it pissed him off insanely. Inukashi was surprised, saying he rarely got angry, and asked him not to say it was because of her. Sion gritted his teeth, saying he was angry at Nezumi, thinking to himself who he thought he was, destroying everything and then just running away. Inukashi grabbed Sion's hand and asked him to stop making that scary face, saying it didn't suit him and scared the dogs. Sion looked around the hall with a half-collapsed ceiling, filled with dogs, some lying down, others playing, and a pile of puppies curled up at his feet. He noticed they didn't look scared. Inukashi confidently said dogs get scared even if they don't show it, but with him they felt safe because he was calm, and that was better than being a scarecrow. She added that Nezumi could never do what Sion could. Sion asked what exactly. Inukashi explained Nezumi was a destroyer and couldn't build a new world from the ruins like Sion, and he never had that ability from the start, or as he told her himself, never would. She admitted she agreed with him, and that Nezumi wasn't special, unlike Sion, and advised him not to overwork or wait for Nezumi's return, because he wouldn't come back just for that. Sion realized he wasn't angry but irritated with himself for feeling helpless and only able to wait, yet still believing in Nezumi's promise. "We'll definitely meet, Sion," and that he would never deny that promise. Inukashi reminded that Sion visits the park once a month, where the correctional facility used to be, and asked to take her along next time, so she could bring little Sion for a walk. In the park stood a monument resembling the correctional facility's facade, built in memory of those taken and sacrificed, and the events that happened there. It commemorated what occurred on that site. Victims' names were engraved on the outer wall, including residents of the 6th zone, like Safu, Sion's once best friend, who died when the facility was destroyed. Every month, Sion brought her flowers and drew strength from these visits, reminding himself that there should be no more victims, and kept thinking about what he could and should do. Thinking of Safu, Sion agreed to the picnic idea, though he felt tired. Inukashi clicked her tongue, making the dogs alert, and said they just wanted to have fun, relax, and enjoy themselves. She admitted that if she carried a burden like Sion's, she'd have stopped moving long ago, and warned that if he focused too much on serious problems, she wouldn't join him because it would be all hassle and no fun. Little Sion hates that too. Sion asked what fun meant. Inukashi said they needed to enjoy themselves, have a picnic or something like that. Sion suggested making sandwiches, but Inukashi said if they were from Karen, fine, but not if he made them. Sion sighed and decided to ask his mom, who would gladly prepare everything if she knew he was going on a picnic with Inukashi. Inukashi cheered happily and asked for softer sandwiches so little Sion could eat too, dreaming of thick ham and lots of eggs. Sion promised to pass on the requests and guest mom would make cheese and fruit sandwiches, maybe buns with homemade jam and marmalade. Inukashi was delighted and asked not to forget the picnic. Her eyes sparkled and she licked her lips. Sion thanked her, but she was surprised and asked why. He explained it was for the sandwiches from Karen, and she promised to bring spring water. Sion said he'd let her know when he could take a day off to plan the picnic. Inukashi asked to send greetings to Karen and remind her the paninis were great. Sion nodded and promised to mention the ham and egg too. Inukashi confessed she might even whisper "I love you" and give a kiss, and she and her dogs would lick his face for free. Sion smiled and declined, promising to see her again. Inukashi allowed Sion to hold little Sion next time, and he thanked her, noting that every visit brought something new. Inukashi waved lazily, and all the dogs stood up to see him off together. The picnic promise remained unfulfilled. Sion couldn't find time due to his hectic schedule, but tomorrow seemed to be his first day off in a long while, and the weather was improving. Karen happily took on making the best sandwiches for Inukashi and little Sion, always curious about them. Sion stared out the rain-speckled window, his faint reflection visible. He recalled a man skilled with a knife, swinging it freely and taking lives, and that having the killer at large was dangerous. He didn't intend to interfere with the Security Bureau's work, but wanted to know the investigation's results.
Он не собирался лезть в дела Бюро безопасности, но хотел узнать результаты расследования.
Doubts flashed through his mind. 2 years ago, a brief period close to anarchy began when the security system collapsed, and in the chaos, people lost their worldview, sense of justice, security, and principles. With order restored, crime dropped but didn't vanish. Some kept killing or injuring others, some took their own lives, thieves caused riots, and clashes broke out between former residents of the 6th Zone and the Western Bloc. However, the case reported by Ruka stood out. Someone was killing with clear malice, no link between victims found yet, gender, residence, and age didn't matter, these were random murders. Someone roamed the streets with a sharp knife, picking victims at random. Or maybe there was a connection between the victims that security hadn't uncovered yet. Sion pressed his fingers lightly against the window glass, pondering what could unite these three. His main task was to prevent new victims so no one else would die. Drops of water slid down the glass, merging and falling onto the frame like a river flowing into the sea. He muttered aloud, "A knife? Huh." Outside, it grew slightly lighter. Perhaps the rain clouds were thinning. Sion pushed off the ground and sped west on his bike through the forest park. Birds were silent in the treetops, and street lamps lit the path at regular intervals, casting deep shadows between them. West of the park lay a small area called the Lost City, where his mother, Karen, ran a tiny bakery. She baked bread, buns, and sometimes cherry pies and quiches, neatly displaying them in the window. The shop was small with modest income, but Karen kept working, taking only 1 day off a week. Even on the day the 6th Zone fell, she baked bread and handed it out to people. Nezumi once noted that Sion had an amazing mother, his words blending with the scent of fresh baking. Sion remembered that feeling of lightness, as if he were floating slightly in the air. 7 days later, Nezumi left him, promising to meet again. A promise never fulfilled. After the storm, gusts of wind still blew occasionally. Passing through the park, Sion reached the Lost City. The cobblestone road gleamed wet, lights flickered in the dark, and all that remained was to turn off the main street and climb the hill. Then he'd be home. Suddenly, Sion decided to buy ham, eggs, and fruit at a small shop at the hill's base, where the selection was limited but quality perfect. He slowed down and a chill ran down his spine. A warning bell rang in his ears. The front wheel hit something. The handlebars jerked violently, and Sion barely held on but lost balance and fell onto the road, his bike crashing behind him with a loud thud. He managed to slow down, softening the fall, but his body went numb for a moment. Sion got up, the ringing in his head persistent. He pulled out a pocket flashlight and shone it on the bike. Someone had deliberately set a trap on this narrow street, used only by cyclists and pedestrians. A voice in his head urged him to run, But at that moment Sion was yanked sharply from behind, and a sharp urge to kill pierced him. His legs tangled, and he hit his back against the wall of an old restaurant once home to an elderly couple, now abandoned. Sion felt his arm with his other hand and smelled blood. His palm was wet and slippery. A broad-shouldered man in black stepped from the shadows, his face half hidden by a mask, gripping a double-edged dagger in his right hand. The blade flashed in Sion's eyes. The man was surprised Sion dodged and swung the knife diagonally down, aiming for his throat. Sion ducked lightning fast, the strike missing his head by centimeters. He straightened sharply and kicked the attacker's wrist hard, knocking the knife with a dull clang onto the wet road. Sion jumped up and ran. Suddenly something caught his legs again. He rushed forward, barely staying upright, but lost balance and crashed into the wall once more. A shadow loomed over him, the knife flashing down. That day it rained. The dogs weren't washed, and baby Sion wasn't taken outside. The second floor of the ruined hotel where Inukasi and the baby lived was solidly built and sheltered them from the storm. The baby could already walk and even run straight, chew and swallow food without Inukasi's help. Months ago, she consulted Karen, who warned that children this age could easily choke, so they needed close watch. Since then, Inukasi never took her eyes off him during feeding. Humans required more care and attention than dogs, who quickly learn and mimic adult pack behavior. Inukasi was glad Sion was near because he brought warmth and comfort to her heart. That feeling, whether happiness or simple contentment, was pleasant, light, and bright, overcoming her usual irritation. Baby Sion wasn't as resilient as a dog and wasn't growing as fast as they did. 2 years had passed since he was brought to Inukasi, but he still needed care. He couldn't survive without a protector. Inukasi protected him with all her strength. She grew up in the Western Bloc and was likely born there. She never had anyone to call a parent and was probably an orphan. The old man who found her as a baby eventually abandoned her too. People always left, but Inukasi had dogs who stayed by her side. She drank dogs' milk, ate what they ate, and lived alongside them. The old man taught her words, the alphabet, reading, and writing to prepare her for independence. He first made sure she would survive, then disappeared. Inukasi never wondered why he left, seeing it as a waste of time, like many things in this world. Sometimes she remembered the old man and silently thanked him. That was how she honored him. As long as she had dogs, people and their absence didn't bother her. Then, suddenly, little Sion appeared amidst it all. Inukasi was caught off guard, stunned, and deeply worried. She often lifted the baby to the sky, asking what she should do with this child. She already had plenty to care for with dozens of puppies and didn't know how to raise a human infant. Sometimes fear overwhelmed her, but despite it, she chose to keep going. Inukasi fiercely protected little Sion, refusing to let illness or injury take his life. Little Sion was the infant entrusted to them by Sion on the day of the raid. His mother was taken to a correctional facility during the hunt, and amid the market ruins, she cried out, begging to save the child. Inukasi didn't care whose child he was. She took responsibility for raising him and believed he had no one but her. She took this responsibility seriously, handling it sometimes with frustration, sometimes with joy. Sion was a strong baby, rarely sick, ate well, laughed clearly, moved actively, and slept soundly. Dogs constantly licked him, so he had no rashes or skin problems. Karen admired Inukasi, calling her a wonderful caregiver and noting the child's rare liveliness, affection, and cheerfulness. Inukasi could tell genuine compliments she liked to hear. 3 days ago, on a muggy, cloudy day, an old woman in a pale blue dress and matching umbrella visited Inukasi. Her white hair was neatly styled in soft curls framing her round cheeks. Everything about her, from dress and umbrella to hairstyle, spoke of refinement and nobility, like a pampered dog never knowing cold or heat. Inukasi frowned when the woman greeted her with a smile. At that moment, Inukasi was tending to her large dogs suffering from skin diseases, carefully trimming fur, cleaning affected areas, and applying medicine using an ointment given by Sion and old tailor scissors from Karen. Karen told Inukashi she saved Zion's life and could never fully repay her. But Karen emphasized she helped not just out of duty to her son, but because she loved Inukashi and Nezumi and would do anything she could. She admitted she could do nothing for Nezumi but hoped to help Inukashi in some way, even if just sharing bread, since Inukashi was already standing on her own and raising a child. Inukashi replied that Karen already did much for her, and it made her happy. Karen's words meant more to her than gold. Inukashi loved Karen deeply. Strong, unobtrusive, helpful without pressure, baking delicious bread, and sometimes hugging her, her hands smelling of warm, freshly baked bread. She also felt affection for Karen's son. Inukashi's first impression of Sion was strange. He smelled unpleasantly of the sixth zone. His hair was white like an old man's, and he was a naive fool who didn't know not to trust strangers. He immediately offered his hand for a handshake, couldn't fight, and had no weapons. Inukashi was sure he wouldn't last 3 days in the Western Bloc and expected his death as inevitable. But reality exceeded all expectations. Sion survived and lived into the new world after the fall of the sixth zone. Thanks to Nezumi, who saved him from death, and Sion who protected and preserved Nezumi's life. The two remained a mystery. Inukashi sighed involuntarily. 2 years ago, when Inukashi learned Nezumi lived with a white-haired guy, she was shocked. Zion's presence in Nezumi's life was neither a joke nor a lie. It was a reality Inukashi refused to accept. She never unraveled Nezumi and he remained a mystery to her. His true nature was hidden, but Inukashi didn't seek to know him better or get closer. She preferred they never meet again. One thing was clear. Nezumi kept everyone at a distance, always a loner, and Inukashi had never seen him with company. Even her keen nose detected no scent of another person on him. After the initial shock passed and she met Sion, he seemed quite normal. She couldn't explain what about him made that impression, but Sion no longer felt like a stranger. Nezumi and Sion fit together like a hand in a glove, and the idea they parted after the sixth zone fell seemed impossible. Inukashi didn't know where Nezumi was or what he was doing, but she was sure he was alive. If he were weak, she might have felt sympathy, but Nezumi was cautious and knew how to survive. As for Sion, his life was protected, and he had grown stronger. Though Inukashi hadn't seen his fighting skills herself, even Nezumi was once caught off guard by him. She noticed confusion and fear in Nezumi's eyes, an expression he rarely showed. But it didn't matter, and over time she forgot it. After the walls between the sixth zone and the Western Bloc fell, the city changed, and Inukashi, focused on caring for the dogs and little Sion, just tried to survive. She ignored matters beyond her control. Lately, she often recalled Nezumi's eyes and profile, which annoyed her. Mentally, she scolded him, saying Sion needed help, and only he could provide it. Every time she met Sion, Inukashi involuntarily asked how he was, though she knew there was no one to worry about except little Sion and the dogs. Recently, Sion came with bread, and watching him smile and hand over the bag, Inukashi held back the question, "How are you?" From the outside, Sion seemed the same. His white hair gleamed silver, his cheekbones slightly defined, and he greeted her with a warm smile. Though he lived in constant danger in the Western Bloc and couldn't fight, he now led the sixth zone and had personal guards. His combat skills were more serious than they appeared, and even Nezumi was surprised by them. 3 days ago, when the old woman came, Inukashi was tending the dogs under a gloomy sky, thinking of Sion. After their picnic plan, they hadn't met again, and Sion later sent a brief note saying the meeting had to be postponed. But he hadn't forgotten her. That was the last she heard from him. Dipping her finger in a light green ointment, Inukashi applied it to the dog's inflamed skin, and the medicine worked quickly. The sores nearly healed. The old woman greeted her again, smiling and folding her umbrella, then asked how old Inukashi was. When she heard no answer, she asked if her parents were nearby. Inukashi thought her mother had long died and explained that her mother was a big dog who fed and kept her warm. The old woman apologized for the tactless question and fussed, repeating her apologies. Inukashi realized the woman hadn't come for the dogs and decided to ignore her, gathering scissors and medicine, not wanting to waste time on idle talk with a stranger. Little Sion, sleeping in the stroller, showed signs of waking. Inukashi dug the stroller out from under debris. It was sturdy and mostly intact, except for a broken handle. After minor repairs, the stroller was usable. It had a square frame and 4 wheels, more like a box but comfortable. Inukashi fixed the handle, lined the bottom with old cloth, and now the stroller served as a bed for Sion. On cold days, he slept there with the little dogs, who kept him warm just like Inukashi's mother once kept her warm. The old woman spoke again, surprised that Inukashi had a baby, and approached the stroller. Inukashi shouted for her not to come closer, picked up Sion, and stepped back. All the dogs around stood up, which should have scared the stranger away. The old woman tried to calm her, calling the boy adorable and asking how old he was, guessing around 2 years. Inukashi replied that Sion was not yet 20, meaning in dog years. The old woman laughed, admiring her humor, though Inukashi was not joking. The old woman continued asking if Inukashi went to school, explaining that in the former Western Bloc many orphan children were cared for and given a chance to study so they could live with dignity and not perish. Inukashi had known this for a long time. Children lost their parents and ended up on the streets, struggling to survive, especially due to the threat from the 6th zone, which created hell beyond the walls, starving people, freezing them, spreading disease, and then launching raids. The old woman told how many infants and toddlers she had buried, digging graves and placing stones as markers, asking, who among the living had ever bowed before their graves or prayed? Inukashi recalled how adults treated them like insects, not seeing them as people. She knew that was why they came from the 6th zone. Inukashi felt a surge of rage and hatred toward the old woman, who seemed to embody the spirit of the 6th zone. But at that moment, someone called her, and she clenched her teeth, lowering her gaze. She hated the 6th zone with fierce hatred but knew she could not hate Sion, Karen, and little Lily from the bakery, who were also from the 6th zone. Lily had recently asked permission to kiss Sion on the forehead, beaming with happiness, and Inukashi knew Lily had a younger sister, and their father had gone to work and never returned, killed in the 6th zone's grinder. Lily's mother had already accepted this, burying her hopes. Inukashi felt compassion, not hatred, for this family. She understood not everyone from the 6th zone deserved hate but wondered who to direct all her anger at. The rage quieted, hiding deep inside. The old woman quietly and hoarsely admitted she knew what had been done to them, and that her daughter, husband, and grandson were also killed by the 6th zone. Inukashi looked up, meeting the woman's eyes, dark like Karen's. The old woman added that no apology could erase the guilt but asked to be heard. Inukashi held her breath and hugged Sion close, who squirmed and growled from the tightness. The old woman confessed she had lived her whole life outside the walls and couldn't say she was like Inukashi, but that was why she wanted to do something for the living children. Without letting go of Sion, Inukashi stepped back, feeling the need to keep distance from the woman. She asked what school or something like that had to do with all this. The old woman replied that at school you can learn to read books, play instruments, write and count, and learn about civil rights and duties. Then discuss and argue with others, express your thoughts in words, and master these skills. Inukashi snorted, saying no one needs that, and that school is just marching in line and cramming like good boys, which won't put food on the table. The old woman firmly said it's necessary and crucial to avoid repeating past mistakes and prevent a new 6th zone. Inukashi grumbled she didn't understand and asked if the old woman was senile. She replied no, explaining that gaining knowledge nurtures true wisdom that won't let a false holy city rise again, and that wisdom is needed to build a world where minority power doesn't oppress the majority. Inukashi smirked and accused the school of swearing loyalty to the holy city, mentioning the oath of allegiance ceremony and the arrest of one who refused. She said it turns people into obedient dogs for the elites and that it didn't concern her. The old woman's face twisted, her lips trembled, and Inukashi thought she might cry, but she shook her head sharply and said the school isn't like that, and never will be, that there they swear to treat people, themselves, and others well. Anger flashed in her eyes. The old woman exclaimed they would leave Inukashi alone. But what about the child? Inukashi was surprised what Sion had to do with it. The old woman explained that in the Western Bloc, everything is changing, new opportunities arise. People can become engineers, doctors, open restaurants or flower shops, start businesses, dedicate themselves to science, music, sports, or art. The first step to this is knowledge and experience, which is why school is needed. When the child grows and thinks about the future, school will help him achieve his goals. It's a place for everyone and an important part of life. Inukashi silently pressed her lips. The old woman continued that even if Inukashi doesn't want to go herself, she should think of the child and trust them. If he gets sick, he'll see a doctor, he'll get 3 full meals a day, have a clean bed, attend school, learn, make friends, and maybe meet those with whom he'll share dreams and future. And, of course, he will stay with her if she goes along. Inukashi barked for the old woman to leave, sensing a trap and realizing they wanted to take Sion from her. She ordered her to leave and never come back, warning that if she did, she wouldn't be so polite. The dog nearby jumped up and growled, scaring the old woman, who stepped back. She apologized for the suddenness and offered a flyer, but Inukashi didn't take it. The woman introduced herself as Shuri and noted that Inukashi could read, since she was examining the label on a medicine bottle. Inukashi stayed silent, and the old woman placed the flyer between 2 crumbling bricks. 3 days passed. Shuri didn't come back, and Inukashi hoped it would stay that way. Elder Sion hadn't sent news, which began to worry her slightly. Inukashi went to check on little Sion, who was sleeping not in a stroller but on a white long-haired dog. His steady breathing showed he was comfortable, but nap time was ending, and soon he'd wake up to be fed yesterday's soup. After a diaper change, Inukashi's gaze fell on the flyer lying on the table. She hadn't thrown it away, though she'd crumpled it, then smoothed it out. In large red letters on the wrinkled paper was written, "Tomorrow's Sky." Despite reluctance, her eyes scanned the text. The flyer described a place where children could live safely, away from troubles, attend school, learn, and receive everything needed for the future. There, long-term support was provided to every child thanks to the city's backing. The photos showed a cafeteria, clean rooms, babies in cribs wrapped in warm blankets. Maybe little Sion would be better off there. Inukashi stared at the flyer, thinking that if Sion ever wanted to be an engineer, doctor, or open a flower shop, she couldn't help him, except to teach him how to survive until tomorrow. But what good would that do? The Western Bloc was now part of Zone 6, with new buildings, more food options, and less fear of death. The world Sion was to live in was nothing like hers. Inukashi's heart tightened. She didn't want to part with him, but knew things couldn't go on like this. She wondered what to do and whom to ask, Karen or Sion. She remembered that Tomorrow's Sky was city-funded, so Sion was surely involved and could help. Even if not, she knew he wouldn't refuse. Inukashi convinced herself that with Sion and Karen's help, they'd find a way and she wouldn't have to give up the baby. Her heart eased a little, and she sighed deeply. When the rain stopped, she could visit the lost city and see Karen and Sion. The white dog lifted its head, its sharp ears twitching. The small brown dog stood up and paced anxiously. Inukashi asked what was wrong. The dogs were clearly nervous, they sensed what humans couldn't. She wondered if someone was downstairs. The first floor was collapsed walls and the remains of a lobby. On sunny days, Inukashi cooked or washed the dogs there, but today the big dogs hid from the rain in their usual spots. She listened closely. The dogs made no noise. If a stranger appeared, they'd bark, surround, and chase or attack as a pack. Inukashi had trained them that way. Her dogs were an elite unit. She strained her hearing again. Nothing, but something felt wrong. She could feel it on her skin. For a moment, she thought it was the goat she'd found 2 weeks ago. A skinny, limping one wandering near the hotel. In the chaos that destroyed the city, humans weren't the only lost ones. Death separated, cast aside, and left many creatures homeless and alone. There were no pets in the Western Bloc, but livestock existed. Many animals lost their owners or died in the turmoil. Most livestock were slaughtered, yet the goat stubbornly survived. It was skin and bones, no milk or meat. Keeping it made no sense, but if Inukashi slaughtered it, the dogs would get food. With that thought, she brought the goat home. But the goat was stubborn and greedy, almost humanly clever, though less so than the dogs it got along with. Inukashi couldn't bring herself to kill it. She wondered if the goat was the cause of it all, but the dogs were used to it and unbothered. The goat belonged to an old drunk. It wasn't about the goat. Something cunning, sharp, and dangerous had crept into their daily lives. Inukashi's, little Sion's, and the dogs. The feeling was like a few days ago with that old woman, but she posed no direct threat. This time Inukashi was on alert. Goosebumps were about to run down her skin. It was something else. A day or two ago, the city broadcast an emergency. Several victims of an unknown killer were found, unidentifiable by forensics. The criminal was still at large, and authorities advised caution. Inukashi grumbled about the residents' softness and watched the security bureau's loudspeaker truck drive away. 2 years ago, corpses on the streets were common. From murders, suicides, disease, hunger, or massacres. She knew the bureau and the sixth zone had changed, but still wanted to vent her anger. Hunched over, Inukashi tried to forget the broadcast, but memories returned. She thought the killer might be nearby, inside her home. But the dogs would never miss such a dangerous person. They were trained by Inukashi to fight and guard better than any system. She quietly opened the door and snapped her fingers. A large black dog silently approached. She ordered him to watch Sion and stay close. The dog entered the room and lay down beside the white dog. Trusting them to guard, Inukashi left, closed the door silently, and went down the stairs. The dogs on the landing woke and wagged their tails. She motioned them over, and they followed silently. None made a sound. The rain eased, and a cold gust blew through the old hotel. Frost was coming soon. After the winter 2 years ago, free heated shelters opened, heaters were distributed, and the fear of freezing nearly vanished. Filling out a form gave anyone food, furniture, and money. They built a hospital and market selling fresh produce from the southern bloc. People were freed from the fear of cold and hunger, a major breakthrough. Sion led the restructuring committee, and Inukashi praised him silently. She thought sometimes the zone felt suffocating and wanted to preserve the Western Zone's way without turning it into the sixth. She went down the stairs as the wind grew stronger and colder. The first floor was empty. Roof holes gaped open. The floor was puddled where dogs drank. Gray clouds covered the sky, and wet concrete debris littered the ground. Everything looked as usual. Inukashi wondered if she imagined it. Her nerves were tense. Suddenly, a clang came from the second floor. She thought a real threat could easily be missed. Inukashi cried out for baby Sion and rushed upstairs. Their room door was ajar, though she clearly remembered locking it. Her face twisted in a grimace, heart pounding. She burst in as the white and black dogs lifted their heads. Baby Sion was still sound asleep, eyes closed, alive. Inukashi felt relief. He was safe, protected by the 2 dogs. At that moment, something small and brown darted past her feet and vanished behind the faded couch. A tiny brown bundle the size of a handful. Inukashi got goosebumps, thinking it couldn't be real. Suddenly, a dog howled behind her. She was about to turn, but a hand suddenly covered her mouth. No matter how she struggled, the fingers held tight. Slowly, another hand wrapped around her throat.